Got it.
Welcome to Love and Live Abundantly. I'm Ilona.
I'm Bill. Do you want to love more effectively?
Do you want to live fully and love more courageously?
We talk about what all that means.
And how you can achieve it.
Join us. Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Mock, and I'm here with Ilona, who's taking care of some technical difficulties. It seems like that we have a lot of those, but we're soldiering through them. We last time we talked to you, we were talking about anxiety and how it serves as one of the two legs of the most common presentations for people with mental health issues. And what we promised you we would do this time is give you some definitions for anxiety and some examples to help you understand it better. So I will start with a couple of really basic definitions. The first is that there is this kind of classic definition of anxiety that goes way back to Sigmund Freud and even before him, and that is the name that they gave to that kind of fundamental energy that vibrates in all of us, that motivates us to do things. And the example I gave was adolescents are never really bored when they say that. What's happening is that they have that anxiety that they don't have anything to bind it to. So if you're a parent of an adolescent, you understand that the secret for that is get off your butt and do something, and you won't be bored anymore. The other general definition of anxiety is the one that speaks to an amount of anxiety, of fear-like energy that is debilitating and that interferes with one or more of the important areas of your life. It is important to remember that physically, we human beings experience anxiety in every single way, the same way we experience fear. The big difference being, and this is my preferred definition of anxiety, pathological anxiety, and that is that it is fear with no reasonable object in the here and now. So if I'm scared of something that happened 3 years ago, or might maybe sort of kind of will happen a year from now, that's not fear, that's anxiety. And that much energy spent on that is probably not productive. If I'm scared of something and I can't answer your question when you ask me, what are you afraid of? And I can't answer it, then I don't have a reasonable object to be afraid of. If you're pointing a gun at me and you say, why are you anxious? I'll be able to say, I ain't anxious. I'm afraid because you're pointing a gun at me. Reasonable object. So that's it. Those aren't exactly textbook definitions of anxiety, but they'll get us started. What do you say, Ilona?
It reminds me, if it's we all have experienced some sort of trauma in our life, and I remember one time I lived in a house that was on a main street, and there was a really bad car accident, and I could hear the car hit a tree that was on the sidewalk. And I heard a little girl screaming, and yet there was a big wall, so I couldn't jump over the wall. And I had to call 911. I was the first one, so I was grateful that I was able to get on that phone right away and get the person help. But then for a while after that, it was like every time I heard tires screech, it would all of a sudden give me anxiety, like, oh my goodness, I was on alert again. And I feel in some ways too that that it's our trauma, right? That was a little bit of trauma for me in that experience, having to, hearing somebody get into a car accident, hearing a little girl and not being able to climb over the wall to save a life, right? I don't know, that's what I think about. And then,
Mhm.
how that takes us into other parts of our lives.
It's a, I'm going to prove that I earned my PhD by saying that you just demonstrated what some people would call an associative link. That you, as you say, you suffered an event, a trauma, and there were things associated with it. There were noises, there were probably smells, there were certainly sights. Uh, by the way, the strongest of our senses, memories, is smell. But you had all those going on. In the future, it's interesting, you also then had this fear response. In the future, whenever you had those cues, those things that were, if you heard that sound or you saw that thing that was associated with that early trauma, then your response was the same. And you didn't have to have a tree crashing into the tree in front of your yard every time for you to have that same response. You just needed cues, associative links.
And that made me remember how I responded while I was in Ireland.
Mm.
Like,
Say more.
yeah,
Say more.
and same what?
Say more.
Oh, say more. So when I was in Ireland, I was with my loved one, a family member, and he missed his medication one night. He thought he was going to be okay. And, and so halfway through the trip, he disappeared. We couldn't find him. And then when we finally found him, he was standing on a balcony, not knowing that he was in Ireland. Um, he had actually said to me that, I'm like, why are you doing this in Ireland? He's like, we're not in Ireland. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew. And so I had to sign to involuntarily have him admitted to a behavioral health hospital in Ireland. And it was definitely one of the scariest times in my life. I've since broken my leg, and I'd say that's, Ireland was definitely, I don't know which was more traumatic. I'll have to have a think on that. Um, but when I was there, I was in the country all by myself, and I just jumped into survivor mode, and I used the tools that I had learned the last 20 years. And even at times I felt, hanging on really tightly to them because I was grateful to have them. Because if I didn't have them, I don't know where my mental health would have been. And so I used the tools. I started, taking deep breaths and, calming down my nervous system and myself, and feeling at ease and knowing that everything was going to be okay, and being grateful. I was grateful that the doctors spoke English, and that I could, or American, or because I could understand them and they could understand me. I was grateful for the tour guides that we had, and the, other 30 people on that tour, because in those few days, they were my family.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, there was no doubt about it. And I'll never forget the last hotel. So anyway, I'm gonna squirrel here and think about when I was actually there, and the duck. When I had found the duck in the last hotel that I was in, I thought about you and Linda. I tell you this all the time, you forget. That's okay. Anyway, so I had used these tools. feeling gratitude. you know, I was grateful that I was there with him, that he wasn't, one, he wasn't alone, and two, he wasn't with anybody else because I feel that I was the perfect person, to get
Mhm.
him through that. And yeah, so, using those tools really saved me. And, I mean, the rest of my trip, another thing I was grateful for was for their transportation system because I was able to catch up with the tour by taking, a bus. God, it's been years since I've been on a bus. Um, and so, and then I was just grateful for them. There was a woman who was a psychiatric nurse and, like other people who had instances where they had loved ones with mental illness, so they understood as well. So it was, my thought pattern was to choose to be grateful,
Mhm.
for all of those things, and definitely a impactful experience in my life.
Yeah, it does. It really does dovetail with what I was saying earlier about my practice that in the last session, and that is that 95% of the people who showed up in my office were people who had a debilitating reaction to, or perhaps an habituated ongoing reaction called anxiety that tied them up. Uh, they showed up in my office because they didn't have tools. And they felt trapped in it, and it didn't seem to be getting better. And in most cases, it was just getting worse the longer it went on. So that the fact that you had done some previous work and had tools in place that you had a personal experience worked
Mhm.
saved you from spiraling
Yeah,
uh, in that anxiety.
yeah.
Um, but one of the things we didn't talk about last time was what the classes of anxiety disorders. Because it's not as simple as saying, "Oh, Lordy, I'm anxious." Uh, there really are important differences. The big one is generalized anxiety disorder, and that's if that's what you got going on and you got it going on big and you got anxiety going most of the time, and most of the time it ties you up, and sometimes it just gets worse. That's kind of an offhand diagnosis, but that's generalized anxiety disorder. And when you get that wound up and that tied up and that jazzed up, it's hard to do anything normal with your day. That's a big one.
Isn't it also, don't we hold that in our bodies? I know people like that who are constantly they're anxious. They got to make money. They got to, they got to pay the bills. They're going to be late on the mortgage. And so they're feeling anxious, but then they also feel it in their body.
Yes.
I have friends that have, some diseases, and it's because they hold all of that, in their bodies, and it's not healthy for us either.
Well, we here in the Cleveland area, we have one of the biggest Gestalt therapy institutes in the world.
Mm.
And the Gestalt therapists are really big on that. That
So
that in fact, if you have ongoing anxiety, it will find a place in your body to reside. And whether it's in your bowel with irritable bowel, or it's your heart or your blood pressure or whatever, a headache, whatever it might be, that more often than not, the Gestalt say that that's one of the side effects, one of the symptoms.
so wasn't Gestalt, wasn't they were part of a movie with Robin Williams? You know
Uh, that's not clicking for me. No.
so tell us about the Gestalt.
Fritz Perls was the guy who started that school of psychology, and really that we really don't have enough time to go into their whole theory, but one of the really interesting aspect of what they say and do is that if you have that kind of distress going on all the time, there is a physical price to be paid, and that each of us has our own preference, if you will, of how we're going to pay it, whether it's going to be a bowel or whatever. Um, and I because and it makes every kind of sense when you think about it, because anxiety is just fear without a reasonable object. So that means that your body gears up for fight or flight, and you get this adrenaline dump, and you're all charged up and tensed up and ready to go. But we can't do that all the time without it having some consequence. Sooner or later, that well's got to be dry. And that's what ends up happening if you have generalized anxiety disorder. Some of the folks that I've seen behind that kind of anxiety disorder are just flat worn out. They
I'm
just
sure.
can't take it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one big class. Another big class is phobias. If you think about it, because if I have a phobia about, oh, I don't know, yellow paint on the walls, that fits my definition for not having a reasonable object. Uh, no, or a big fluffy bunch of cotton. If that makes me scared to death, that's not a reasonable object. No, 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 no. Or if I'm afraid that I'm going to make a mistake when I'm making a speech and that ties me up in knots, well, that's not a reasonable object either. Because truth be told, if I screw up on a speech, I'll survive it. God knows I have. So, but the phobia thing is we know that there was a trauma somewhere with all phobias that triggered a fear response to something real in the world. And now, whenever we see those associative links, whenever we're in that kind of a circumstance or when we're reminded of it in some very special way, we have the same response. And that's, you and I talked off the air about fear of heights. That's my thing. Um, it's totally unreasonable. I used to be able to climb up ladders 40 foot, no problem, didn't have a problem, could look down. I could jump from one staging to another when but no problem. Then one day I had just a terrible, frightening time going up on a ladder. And now, anytime I get up over 6 feet, I have the same physical and emotional response. That's a phobia. And there are concrete phobias like that, and then there are social phobias. People who can't leave the house. They're afraid to be in crowds of people.
I think a lot
So,
of that, and a lot of that came up with COVID.
uh, uh,
I think part of the reason why we are so disconnected is because we mm.
we
So I think that um with COVID, it separated us and it made us fearful to go near other people and then when you don't care to connect with people because you're afraid if you hug them, you're going to die from an illness,
mm,
then you start to disassociate yourself, right? And so then you don't care. And I'm going off topic here of anxiety, but I
uh,
feel, I just feel that there are still people that have the anxiety around um, being out in public because of
mm,
COVID. But it's also, I had a friend who fell and there was people around her and nobody helped her
mm.
up, and then it's just I feel like it's a lot different than than it was for you when you were my age. I feel like there was more of a community. Like you have your core group of people too. And so I think connecting with people, I mean, that helps not be so anxious either,
Mm,
because we feel good when we're around each other and we connect.
yeah,
Yeah, so I just kind of,
there are degrees of these things, and that, as you say, with COVID, there was a subset of our population. There were some folks who had kind of this mild case of social phobia. They weren't real thrilled about going out, but they could soldier through it, and it was okay. But then you add another layer to that. And that other layer is the one you're talking about, fear of transacting with people, of picking up their bugs, of all kinds of falling down and nobody caring, treating you like a leper. There were all kinds of irrational fears around that most of us could handle. But if you already had some social anxiety, that just added to it. And I think you're right. I think it exacerbated and social anxiety for a lot of folks. A lot of folks. Yeah.
yeah, I think we were made to connect. And, I think that, again, I don't know how we got here, but that our kids are even more anxious than they should be due to COVID.
Well, I think that there's that, and then there's another piece. As long as we're going into the weeds, the 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 thing about anxiety is that I think you're right. I think the next generation is going to be even in worse shape because there's this process that we call binding of anxiety. That is, you do something that you can invest that excess energy into that is productive and makes you feel good, so that you bind that anxiety. You and I grew up in an era when, by God, if you had that excess anxiety, you had to do one of the things you said, call somebody up, go across the street, slap your neighbor, walk your dog, something, go to church, uh, join the scouts, do physical stuff. Now, and those were the things so we had a wide range of things that we could bind our anxiety to. So if I was sitting at home all by myself when I was 14, um, and I was bored, I knew what to do. I got up and I went down to Eddie Keffert's house and knocked on the door. And if he wasn't home, I went to Mike Yancey's house, and somebody was going to be there, and we were going to play football or baseball or something, but we were going to do something. Well, when my granddaughter is at my house, we have a rule. When she comes in the house, she has to throw the phone in the drawer in the hutch in the front hall, because I think this generation is not having enough opportunities and enough varieties of ways to bind their anxiety. And they sit there with playing game after game after game after game. And I think that ill equips them for living in a world that can sometimes produce anxiety. That's sad. Mhm. And by the way, I don't think we went that far afield, either one of us. Now that I think
I
about it.
just, it just kept flowing. And so I'm like, all right, well, I guess we're going with this. Um, oh, geez. Well, and you know what? I think we are at about time
Are
anyways.
we? We
We
can't
are.
be. Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that means that we have to do the following. Hey, y'all, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have case examples, if you'd like to be on the podcast with us, send us an email. Say howdy to us at hello@truthbetold.world. To repeat that, hello@truthbetold.world. I promise you, uh, uh, we're not overwhelmed with responses, so we will respond to every single one you send us, I promise. And that I can't promise that every one of them will be dealt with here on the podcast, but we really are looking for your input as to things that we ought to be talking about here. Is that right?
That is correct. We would love to hear from you. We would, want to hear your experiences. Are there certain things that you would like to discuss with us? Let us know. You can comment below, or, like Bill said, hello@truthbetold.world. Thanks for joining us.
See you next week.